today's session as interactive as possible. So for the first hour, we're going to be having presentations, and then for the last 20 minutes, 30 minutes, depending on time, we would do breakout groups. So I think what we can do is once we get time to the breakout groups, if we can just go click on the original meeting link, we can then get back to those breakout groups. So that's our modest adjustment. So again, thank you. I see that we already have 230 people, more than double than what we had in the last meeting room. So really excited that you are all here to be with us today. My name is Gail Schwartz. I'm with the Associate Director of Policy and Programs with the Housing Alliance. I am joined by an amazing group of speakers today. We have a presentation from researchers from Penn State University and University of Minnesota talking about landlord attitudes. And then we have the team from DCED who's going to be able to talk about some funding opportunities with us for folks who are looking to get housing location services started. And with that, before we get into the meat of everything, I do want to take a couple of minutes and introduce our sponsor for this event, which is Truist Bank. And we have Sherelle Ganges. So first, I got to say thank you to Truist for their ongoing support of the Housing Alliance, specifically in the area of landlord engagement research and supporting small landlord businesses. Sherelle is a senior vice president with Truist Bank. She has over 23 years of financial marketing experience. And since coming to Truist, she works as an internal consultant on various highly visible projects within corporate strategy. So with that, Sherelle, I just want to give you the floor for a few minutes.
Yes. And can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. And thank you again for having us here. Truist is devoted to creating and preserving affordable housing as a critical cornerstone of community revitalization. Truist makes loans and investments that support numerous affordable housing projects that enable low to moderate income families across the nation to live in safer and more secure communities for healthier and happier tomorrows. At Truist, our purpose is to inspire and build better lives and communities. So we are very, very proud to partner alongside with partners like Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania for the summit today. And before we actually get into the meat of the presentation, we would like to launch our first poll and see who else is here with us. Just let us know, who are you? Are you a housing locator, a case manager? There's a plethora of different options there. So let's see who's in the audience today.
We'll give it about another 30 seconds or so, and then we can show results. So this allows us to get a few more people to join, as well as hear from all of you. It's been really exciting to see the interest in this particular session and the diversity in people who have registered. All right, Jen, do you think we're ready to share results? Yeah, so we have a lot of folks that are already housing locators and housing case managers and also mainstream case managers. So again, thank you. And I hope that we have a really good and rich conversation today and make this as interactive as possible. So again, thank you to Truist Bank for your ongoing support. All right, so our agenda for today, we're going to be focusing on, just level setting with the foundations of landlord engagement. We are going to be looking at challenges and solutions when working with landlords, thinking about landlords as social change agents. And also the Housing Alliance has been doing some research on, what are landlord attitudes towards customer service and financial incentives when working with tenant-based subsidy. We want to look at, what does landlord engagement look like in this new rental market post-pandemic? And then do some breakout rooms at the end if time allows. So our next poll is going to be in the chat. Jen, if you could take the poll down. This is a chat, so I'm hoping folks can just type in a couple of quick answers through the chat and let us know, why do you think that landlord engagement is important? What makes this issue matter to the work that you're doing, and why is it so critical to the affordable housing conversation? I'm seeing squashing stigma, broadening, expanding vouchers, having clarity between everybody involved. I really like that one. To develop relationships. Yeah, folks got a lot to say. I'm going to expand this a little bit more so I can see. They are the gatekeepers to housing. That's very true. Competition for apartments. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of great answers, so thank you. So let's get into the foundations of landlord engagement. Another poll to be answered in the chat. What is the common ground between homeless and housing assistance providers, landlords, and clients? What are the things that we share? What's our common ground? What are we all hoping to achieve? The same goal: housing, stability, money searching stability, people in housing, eliminate homelessness, right? Housing and stability, predictability, seeing a lot of common themes here. And so, yeah, what we want to see is stable and lasting tenancy, right? So we all want to make sure that, the clients or the tenants are, in a safe and decent place to live, that they are able to take care of their home, they're a good neighbor, they're, able to make rent on time and able to stay long-term, right? We want multiple years. And when the next move does happen, we want that to be a move of choice, moving on to something better, their next housing goal. So what do we know about our targets, right? When it comes to landlords, I think a lot of people have a lot of very, very strong feelings when it comes to landlords. And, whether you're a person with lived expertise of housing insecurity, eviction, homelessness, almost all of us have some lived expertise with a landlord at some point in our life. So what do we really know about landlords, and, how much of what they're portrayed about really feeds into the work that we do when we're really trying to engage landlords? For me personally, I did a lot of landlord engagement on the ground, working with the homelessness system in the greater Pittsburgh area. And one of the aha moments that I had when that happened is, I sat down with a landlord to just really understand how this business works. Because I really didn't know. I mean, I had been a renter at that point for like 20 years as a person, but had no idea how this business worked. And so one of the things that was really striking to me is that, a good landlord that is taking care of their property well, after all of their other expenses are paid for, is like maybe making $150 per unit, give or take. And that's per month. So that's like 12,000 to 24,000, you know, like as far as income. And so that's not necessarily like a lot of money, right? So especially it takes as much as 20 to 25 units to be able to be a full-time landlord. And that was just really, really shocking to me. I just never contemplated what it took to really make this business work. And even then, you know, the person who was teaching me was like, this person should still have a side hustle, right? They still need to have other income in case something goes wrong. And so what it means is that there's really not a lot of profit for a good landlord, not a slumlord, but a good landlord in the month-to-month rent or day-to-day operations, but that the profit comes in the appreciation of the land, or which can only be accessed by, you know, refinancing the property or selling the property. And so what this means is that it's kind of, you know, unless you're a landlord operating at scale with, you know, hundreds of units, you really are in a state of perpetual scarcity, right? It's just always very scarce resources in kind of the average landlord business. And we also know through great research, folks by, you know, like Matthew Desmond, really talking about kind of the psychology of scarcity and how similar it is to the psychology of poverty. And that, you know, when people are facing this constant, you know, tax to their bandwidth and scarce resources, that they start to get into survival mode and, you know, whatever they can do to get what they need in the moment. And so really what this means is, you know, unless, like I said, landlords are operating at scale, they're either on top of the world or they're under it, right? And any sort of disruption to their rental income puts them under, right? And most people at some point in life like get walloped by life. Something happens. We all get sick. We all, you know, have, you know, times where we're in between jobs. We all, you know, face one hardship or another, or have, you know, a breakup that leads to a need to move, something like that. And, but then, you know, we have this whole housing system where, you know, particularly small landlords who are operating less than 100 units are making up more than half of the rental market, are also kind of like in the state of, you know, one-time economic shock can really disrupt their business, right? And so even if the landlord as an independent person is wealthy, their business is not. And that can kind of lead to, I think, extreme reactions to things that come up in the landlord-tenant relationship and to those disruptions to rental income. And it can also lead to some very interesting actions to be like, how can I get an extra dollar here, or a resource, more money in another way? You know, whether it's these junk fees that seem to be a new thing, or delaying repairs and things like that. So just, you know, thinking about the scarcity that most tenants are experiencing, whether they're low income or not. There's so much research out there showing that, you know, a lot of renters, more than half, are experiencing a housing cost burden. And then you have, you know, a lot of landlords, like more than half of the rental market is owned by these landlords who also like are really don't have much of a cushion to help them weather any sort of disruptions and things going not perfectly in their business. And so I say this to just again, in the hopes of what do you know about your target? I don't want to say that this is an excuse or in any way justifies unfair or illegal landlord practices in any way, shape, or form. I'm not saying that we need to be landlord advocates or landlord therapists or, start to take up the charge of woe with landlords, but I do think understanding the business reality of landlords is very, very critical and foundational to any landlord engagement strategy. And it can help us all be better negotiators and better business partners and design better tools and strategies in our partnerships with landlords as we are looking to connect people who are experiencing homelessness to housing opportunities as quickly as possible, and also helping to stabilize people in the homes where they are at currently. So how do we get to know our landlords, right? Because there's a lot of landlords out there and they are as diverse as the tenants that they house. So what we can do is we can conduct an assessment, and there's lots of different ways that you can do that. You can do that through surveys, focus groups, interviews. You want to make sure that you're talking to folks that not only do work with these programs, but also folks that don't work with these programs. You want to make sure that you are able to preserve the landlord partnerships you have while continuing to build new ones. You want to meet with their leaders. So, in more urban dense areas, that's landlord associations, realtor associations, Facebook groups. It's kind of amazing how many Facebook groups there are where people are like trading properties back and forth and tips back and forth. Meetup groups, things like that. Make sure that you're participating in their events. Join the landlord association, attend any meetings that they're hosting, really make sure that you're going to places where they're most comfortable and aren't going to have their defenses up. Of course, adapt messaging to their language, really make sure you understand their business language and the language of real estate, maybe avoid some of our human service, social justice industry jargon that can sometimes be off-putting. And then always share and seek information the way that we do. So that can be landlord newsletters, social media, setting up information tables at events that either they host or maybe events that that they're going to be at. Home shows, remodeling shows, those types of places tend to get a lot of landlords and folks who own property and are looking to make repairs and upgrades. And the ultimate way to share and seek information is word of mouth. I don't know, and maybe some of the other landlord liaisons and housing locators can share in the chat, but most of the landlords I know, they seem to all know each other and they seem to talk to each other a lot. And so if you can get that good word of mouth referral, I think that's really, really important in any landlord engagement strategy. And then, of course, being responsive to their needs and concerns. It really is about trust, it's customer service. And it's not always easy to deal with landlords. Sometimes they can be very harsh. They can be a little bit combative. Sometimes they can be abusive. They will yell at you because they can't yell at the tenant the way that they want to. But you just gotta kill them with kindness, right? And just, going back to knowing your target and recognizing that you're more than likely dealing with somebody who may be experiencing some kind of scarcity, and that's a crisis in their mind. And you all are crisis workers, so I think you do have some skills that can help you in diffusing those situations, and so many of you are already doing that. And of course, if a landlord is truly out of line, you still need to hold them accountable, whether it's severing the business relationship or some other way. So now we want to get into landlord incentives. And, I like to think of landlord incentives as falling into two separate buckets, right? You have your customer service incentives, right? That's where you have like that single point of contact for landlords, your housing locators, landlord liaisons, coordinators, whatever the job title may be. It could be, landlord information events, having other resources like a website or a portal to, check up on paperwork or, list their units, that kind of stuff. And maybe other things that can help expedite paperwork, right? Because our programs come with a lot of bureaucracy, and there's some things that we can do to make it faster, but there are some things that we can't. So whatever we can do to make sure that we are keeping up with the pace of real estate, which is a very fast transactional business and very different than the slow roll of bureaucracy. But, looking at the customer service solutions to see if you can bridge those two things. And then there are the financial incentives, right? Risk mitigation funds where you have a little bit of pot of money. So, if there's damages to the unit above and beyond the security deposit, that can help with repairs, higher payment standards, anytime that you can make sure that your rents are really in line with what the market is commanding in that particular moment for that unit. Looking at recruitment bonuses and retention bonuses, sign-on bonuses, referral bonuses, things like that. Anything that you can do, especially for, again, folks who are working on really, really narrow margins, right? Like you can maybe honestly like double their profit off of that one unit for like 6 months or something, depending on, how their business is set up. All right. And so we get to our next poll. For all of you out there, what type of landlord incentives are you currently offering? And so this is a Zoom poll. And I see Jen has put it up on the screen for folks to answer. We'll leave it up for just about a minute. I'm going to use this minute to take a drink of water. All right, how are we doing on answers, Jen? Are we starting to see it taper off?
Yep, I'm gonna end the poll and share the results now.
Yeah, so we see a lot of housing navigators out there. We see a lot of folks who are doing some sort of risk damage mitigation, enhanced security deposit. A lot of folks out there are doing none of the above. And we're starting to see some vacancy and hold payments, also, repairs, not for damages, but more for housing quality and just, helping with the overall wear and tear and making sure people pass inspections. A few folks are doing landlord websites and education classes. So it's great to see that so many folks are doing so many kinds of different things. With that, I want to move us into our next section. And this is where we're going to be talking about challenges and solutions, right? Every challenge really is an opportunity to get creative. And so with that, just want to think about, like, what is the problem that we're really, really trying to solve? And, you know, making sure that we're really keeping our focus on what the challenge is. And, you know, especially for all of us who are working in the homelessness service sector, or, you know, maybe you're a landlord coordinator with a public housing authority, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get people into homes, right? We are really working to get people to a place where they're, you know, not just surviving day to day, but that they are thriving and they are able to have that foundation to work towards, you know, whatever their next goals are. And we're doing that when this is happening, right? It's just been absolutely crazy these past few years. And for anybody who's been doing this for a while, landlord engagement was not easy in 2017 at all, in any way, shape, or form. So it's definitely getting harder out there. The demand on rental housing is getting greater. You know, we're seeing lots of change in ownership and rents going up rapidly and things like that. And so, you know, it's forcing all of us to adapt and start to think a little bit differently about this work. So one of the things that the Housing Alliance did last year is we put out a housing locator survey to hear from all of you who are on the front lines engaging with landlords on a regular basis to tell us what you were seeing. And what you are telling us that, you know, you're having trouble keeping the landlords that you have, as well as trouble recruiting new ones. You know, folks who have a past eviction or no income or are unemployed, those are the biggest barriers to overcome. A lot of landlords feel burned. They don't just feel burned by the tenants. You know, sometimes they're starting to feel burned by agencies, right? Case managers, you know, have a lot of turnover, and somebody falls through the cracks, and, you know, landlord calls about something and that person has moved on. Those types of challenges have started to really reflect in our landlord engagement work. Rural communities, you know, you guys are seeing pressures that you've never seen before, but, you know, you have less resources for landlord incentives. And then what we are seeing with folks is that we're seeing kind of this new evolution with landlord incentives, where, you know, many folks are still doing the risk mitigation fund, which was kind of like the go-to prior to the pandemic, but we're now starting to see people also offering some more money on the front end, whether it's in the form of a vacancy hold or a sign-on bonus or something like that, or repair funds. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to the great folks from Penn State University. So we have Selena Ortiz. Her work focuses on the social determinants of health, health equity, and health and social policy formation, with the goal of promoting social justice in housing affordability, healthcare access, and healthcare outcomes within racial, ethnic, and low-income communities. And we also have Andrew Fenlon. His work examines on how public housing and housing choice voucher programs are related to physical and mental health, environmental risk exposures, neighborhood attainment, and considers how these programs might reduce racial, ethnic, and economic disparities. So I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to you guys.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm going to share my screen, and then I'm going to have Andy present our beginning of our work, and I'll take it from there. So let me see. I can. May I ask what you are seeing?
We can see your presentation.
See your presentation. You can see the presentation. Great.
Great.
Okay. My name's Selena Ortiz, and my colleague Andy Fenelon and I have been working on this project, focusing.
We're getting a lot of feedback. I don't know if other folks.
Oh, I don't know why. I will stop speaking, see if I can work on that, and I will hand it over to Andy. Thanks, everybody.
Sounds good. So thank you everyone so much for having us and for coming. And I'm Andy Fenelon. I'm an associate professor at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, and my colleague Selena Ortiz is at Penn State. And we're excited to present our work on the impact of Pittsburgh's innovative mobility vouchers on racial and economic equity. So this project fits into the overall theme of today's summit, but before we get started, I do want to acknowledge the funder and as well as our collaborators. So this project was a 2-year award funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's Policies for Action program. And of course, I need to say the views here don't necessarily reflect the views of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. For this project, it wasn't just us, of course. We collaborated with folks at the Housing Authority of the City of Pittsburgh, the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania, as well as a community advisory board of stakeholders, tenants, and advocates in the City of Pittsburgh. So I probably don't need to tell folks on this summit about our setting, but just a little bit of background on Pittsburgh. It's a medium-sized city of about 300,000 people. It has a uniquely beautiful landscape, and it's relatively geographically small for cities of its size. And this unique landscape gives rise to dozens of neighborhoods that each have their own independent character, town centers, and there's a lot of variation. The city is also racially and economically diverse. It's about 2/3 non-Hispanic white and about 1/4 Black or African American. But at the same time, the city is very racially and economically segregated. So it has the 35th highest Black-white dissimilarity index among 340 metro areas in the United States. So near top 10% in terms of segregation. And there's also economic inequality between Black and white families. And Black families are more than twice as likely to live near distressed blocks than are white families. As in many cities, but potentially more acutely in the city of Pittsburgh, housing affordability is a major concern. 40% of renters are cost burdened, so they pay at least 30% of their income towards rent. And this problem is more acute for low-income households, among whom 2/3 pay at least half of their income towards housing. And so this is a major issue, and this is where we sort of enter in order to find a potential solution to housing affordability and inequality concerns in Pittsburgh. Next slide. So one potential program model to address housing affordability is the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Housing Choice Vouchers are funded by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and administered by local housing authorities. And the traditional Housing Choice Voucher Program provides a subsidy for assisted families to identify a rental unit in the private market and rent it. And so families are expected to pay about 30% of their income towards rent, and the voucher ends up covering the difference between their contribution and the fair market rent. Now, one of the issues here is that families themselves are typically responsible for finding a suitable unit and an amenable landlord. And that often presents a lot of difficulties. And beyond that, there are other limitations to the traditional voucher program. In many cases, the value of the voucher, only going up to the fair market rent, around the 40th percentile of rents in a housing market, is not sufficient to afford high opportunity neighborhoods. There are also additional difficulties with the search for a suitable unit. This presents a large administrative burden for relatively low income tenants that are attempting to identify both a suitable unit and a landlord that is willing to rent to a tenant with a voucher. And then beyond that, there's community and landlord opposition to having voucher tenants in particularly high opportunity, low poverty neighborhoods. And then there's just on the ground landlord opposition to dealing both with the housing authority itself as well as renting to voucher units. And so there's definitely a landscape here in which some revision to the Housing Choice Voucher Program is necessary. The Housing Authority of the City of Pittsburgh launched its mobility voucher program in 2020 to address some of these limitations. The Housing Authority identified mobility zones within the city of Pittsburgh, and these are areas of relatively low poverty, high amenities, good access to jobs, and less racial and economic segregation. And if tenants are able to use their vouchers in these zones, they receive an increased payment standard. So about 30% above the small area zip code level fair market rent. And so the idea here is to increase the incentive to use vouchers in relatively high opportunity neighborhoods. So we set out to answer two main research questions in our Robert Wood Johnson Foundation project. The overall goal was to examine the potential for these mobility vouchers to promote racial and economic equity in access to high opportunity neighborhoods in the city of Pittsburgh. Our first research question is, what are the effects of the use of HACP mobility vouchers on racial, ethnic, and economic equity in neighborhood attainment compared to the traditional housing voucher program? And then secondarily, what factors are related to landlords' willingness to rent to individuals and families in the mobility voucher program? So the first step here is an analysis of administrative data from the Housing Authority. And here we're really interested in identifying these areas circled here. This is a map of voucher concentrations pre-program in the year 2019. And you can see there are particular neighborhoods in Pittsburgh with a dearth of housing choice vouchers. By 2022, after the mobility voucher program had rolled out, there still were not many mobility vouchers in use, only 72 vouchers compared to more than 5,200 traditional vouchers in use. Now, although there were relatively few mobility vouchers in use, there appeared to be some success in getting families access to both lower poverty neighborhoods. You saw a significant reduction in neighborhood poverty rate for mobility voucher recipients, in neighborhood household income, increases in median neighborhood rent, as well as increases in access to jobs. And so this is what we would hope for in the use of mobility vouchers, giving families access to relatively high opportunity neighborhoods. Next slide. And there's also some promising results for racial equity. So in addition to improvements in neighborhood opportunity for mobility voucher recipients as a whole, we saw larger improvements for Black recipients in terms of reductions in neighborhood poverty, increases in access to jobs, as well as increases in access to higher rent neighborhoods. But it's not all good news. So although we see a larger benefit for Black families who receive mobility vouchers, white families have been better able to take advantage of the program. And so the traditional voucher program tends to have a much higher fraction of non-Hispanic Black families than the mobility voucher program. So now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Selena Ortiz to discuss the next step.
Hey, Selena, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you for that. Can you hear me better than before? Can you hear me?
Still a little feedbacky, but
Little feedback,
Yeah.
but we can hear you.
No idea why that is. Is it really bad?
No, I think you can continue.
All right, thank you so much. I will do my best to be as clear as possible. And so one of the things that we wanted to make sure to do was to understand why we were seeing such a low number of mobility vouchers distributed at that point. One of the things that we've done is conduct a series of landlord surveys in the mobility zones throughout Pittsburgh. And so these are results from our first wave of the landlord survey. And again, while we've gained many insights from this first wave of data, in the interest of time, we're only going to focus on a few of the findings, and focusing on how to engage landlords in participating in the program. Okay, so in our survey, we asked respondents how likely or unlikely they were to rent to someone with a mobility voucher. And here we see that just over 32% reported, and you can see here either unlikely or very unlikely, that they would be unlikely or very unlikely to rent to someone with a mobility voucher. And this is compared to just around 29% who stated that they would be very likely or likely to do so. Now, we note that the majority of respondents, about 39%, reported that they would be neither likely nor unlikely or were unsure about renting to someone with a mobility voucher. So still a lot of opportunity here to engage landlords, to inform them about what the program is about and how they stand to benefit from participating in the program. To investigate what factors might increase their likelihood of renting to someone with a voucher, between 60 to 64% reported having better communication with the housing authority, having a single point of contact at the housing authority to help manage the rental process for voucher recipients, and receiving timely responsiveness to requests from the housing authority would make it more likely to participate in the program. Now, in regard to the higher payment standard that Andy talked about earlier, around 35% of respondents actually reported that it was indeed not enough of an incentive to participate, while over 36% reported that they were unsure that it was enough of one. We also examined what types of incentives might increase participation in the program. And we found that about 70% of respondents reported receiving a signing bonus of $1,000 would make it more likely that they would participate in the program. Beyond financial incentives, we also examined other factors that may influence landlord participation. For example, approximately 48% and 49% reported that receiving a consistent rent payment and having a long-term tenant, respectively, would influence their decision to participate in the program. Now, I also just want to point here that over 30% of respondents stated that supporting families seeking housing in communities that provide opportunities would actually influence their decision a great deal. And so what these findings gave us at this beginning stage of in wave one were some clues as to what sorts of questions we could follow up with and actually see here what are some tactics or strategies that could be employed in regard to tapping into landlords' altruistic sort of views on having a resource that was quite needed and that others could of course benefit from. So turning to that, we did conduct key informant interviews with landlords who did participate in the wave one study. And just really quickly, I want to let you know that we interviewed about 21 landlords. The objective of the interviews was threefold. We wanted to explain findings from the landlord survey. We wanted to probe what may deter participation in the mobility voucher program. And of course, we wanted to identify strategies to increase, and not just increase, but sustain landlord participation. So major themes emerged within the following three topics, including their experiences with the Housing Choice Voucher Program, so past experiences with the housing authorities in these areas, their views about the Mobility Voucher Program in general, and their beliefs about how successful it could be, and views about how to address housing affordability issues in Pittsburgh. So there we pull the lens back to get their views at a more general level about how they see themselves as a change agent in actually addressing this big concern. But because of time, we're only going to focus on select themes within topics 2 and 3. So, for example, one of our themes focused on what would motivate landlords to participate in the mobility voucher program. And landlords reported, first and foremost, that they would like the program to be efficiently administered. And this list is not exhaustive, right? So some examples are to improve communication, to eliminate unnecessary delays, to streamline the inspection process, to assign a dedicated caseworker, and so on and so forth. They also thought that thinking about, again, their own unit, their own resource that they have is a way for them to be altruistic. And many of them said, just feeling like they were doing the right thing in participating in this program could also be a motivating factor, which then speaks to the messaging piece that I think is something that is an opportunity, right, to build upon. Relatedly, they'd like to hear how the program is a societal return on investment. So not just a return on investment for their own means, their own financial gain, but how the mobility voucher program can help individuals and families, especially those with children, get a fair start, be able to benefit from the program, be able then to develop and then to in return also give back to the community. And Gail had mentioned earlier in thinking about assurances, our landlords also said the same thing. They want additional financial resources or they want non-financial assurances. And one of the things that was told, that we were told again and again, was that they'd like to be able to feel that they were supported and that they themselves also were protected by the housing authorities just as much as they thought that tenants were. Another theme that emerged within the topic of addressing housing affordability in Pittsburgh was that landlords held diverse beliefs about the ability of the mobility voucher program to address these problems of segregation and housing affordability. So landlords did state that the program, in fact, had potential to be a viable solution, but that it was only a partial solution at best. Landlords opined that for it to be effective, the program needed to address issues of NIMBYism, racism, and discrimination. Again, a lot of landlords speaking about what they're hearing from other landlords and within their networks, both in person and throughout social media. And landlords felt that the program could go a lot further to actually address issues of potential isolation and discrimination, and maybe even more financial assistance to tenants. Now, another theme that emerged is that landlords want to be engaged and or collaborate with others to address issues pertaining to housing affordability in Pittsburgh. For example, landlords stated that they want to be seen as collaborators and partners by the housing authority. Many of them felt that Gail had this great image of sort of being burned, that is indeed the reality. And many of them said things like, well, the housing authority just goes through new pockets of new groups of new landlords and they burn through them. It's like a revolving door. And we're tired of that. So instead of being told what to do, they want to indeed be seen as a strategy partner with the housing authorities to better design these programs so that it benefits people who use these vouchers and themselves. They also want it to be easier for themselves to learn about the issues facing Pittsburgh tenants. Many of them said this was the very first time they'd ever been contacted, that they've never spoken to anyone about these voucher programs, let alone this issue of housing affordability in Pittsburgh at all. And so they're looking for ways in which to be able to become involved. They also think that it's important to incentivize learning about housing affordability issues, and again, framing the issue in a way that emphasizes the value of landlord input and participation. Now, so in summary, our results indicate that the number of mobility vouchers in current use may indicate a very low interest among landlords to participate in the mobility voucher program. and that Pittsburgh landlords' motivations to participate in the voucher program does not seem to be greater than their very low motivation to participate in the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Again, logistical challenges of working with the housing authorities are identified as the number one barrier to participating, and increasing and retaining landlord participation in the mobility voucher program will require significant investments by the housing authority of the city of Pittsburgh, as well as other housing authorities. So we just want to just quickly say we did present these findings to the housing authority of the city of Pittsburgh. We had a number of recommendations, and I'll just read them here quickly in red. Improving communication with Pittsburgh landlords and local housing organizations, and that means developing best practices related to overall communication and customer service training for staff. Proactively seek engagement with Pittsburgh landlords, and that means organizing and convening a landlord advisory board to discuss these issues and others, and to share perspectives and ideas around the programs that the housing authorities conduct. Provide more incentives and assurances, both financial and non-financial, to landlords participating in voucher programs. And this is something that a newly formed landlord advisory board could do. Improve administrative processes, and I emphasize inspections to expedite and ensure tenant placement, because oftentimes these timeframes are not optimized because of the slowness and the inefficiencies around these processes. And last, emphasize the relationship between housing affordability and health. There's other findings that we had that show that landlords who understand this link are actually even more engaged, or want to be more engaged with participating in these programs. Lots to talk about. I just want to again thank our community advisory board, and I want to thank all of you for coming this afternoon. Happy to discuss with any of you further about our work. So thanks so much.
Thank you. The Housing Alliance also did our own landlord survey, so I do want to share some of that information with you all. So we did a landlord survey. We had 660 respondents. The vast majority of them were for-profit market rate. We know about a third of them are working with tenant-based subsidy, like the Housing Choice Voucher Program or programs offered through the Homelessness Assistance System. And more than half have 20 units or less. So we really were talking to kind of the smaller mom and pop. And so we asked them what their challenges are. And tenant management came up a lot, trouble meeting their financial obligations, ongoing trouble with repairs and maintenance. We saw that landlords with less than 100 units, about 80% of them reported tenant issues and maintenance issues. 2/3 of small landlords with less than 20 units were struggling to meet their financial obligations. And some of the biggest cost drivers in landlord businesses overall is, the rapidly increasing cost of utilities, cost for repairs and even minor maintenance. And then what's happening with property taxes as, property values are skyrocketing. So we also asked them about criteria. Surprise, eviction is a big common screening criteria. Nearly 80% of landlords are screening for eviction. Between, 71 and 73% are also screening for folks that are unemployed or have no income at all. And a lot of folks are screening for those who have violent records of violent criminal history. But we also talked to landlords about what are you most willing to overlook. And so landlords are willing to overlook bad credit by about 2/3, while Eviction is a big screener. They are willing to overlook people who do not have any rental history at all. So this may be immigrants or refugees that first came to the country, transition age youth who, you know, are renting an apartment for the first time, that kind of thing. And then they are also willing to overlook somebody who, you know, does have some income, even if that income is not 3 times the rent, which is sort of a standard industry practice when it comes to screening. Now, what are we seeing that fewer landlords are willing to overlook? So we've seen this slide before, right? About only 40% are willing to overlook having no income. Less than that, we see about a third of landlords, only a third of landlords are willing to overlook an eviction, especially when, you know, compared, partnered with rental assistance and case management. And then we also found, of course, criminal record, again, you know, even with case management, even with rental assistance, we are seeing very few landlords are willing to overlook this. Even less than the 11% are willing to overlook, you know, a very serious crime like a sex offender, Megan's Law. We do see a few more landlords, 23% of landlords will overlook somebody who has a history with drug charges, and 40% will overlook minor offenses. So, going back real quick, I do want to point out, again, you know, the smaller the landlord, the more willing they are to overlook barriers when there's case management and rental assistance involved. And then landlords who have been in the business over 30 years are also more willing to overlook. So we found that very interesting. We also asked folks about their preferred incentives. So, you know, risk mitigation came up. You know, just overall increase in rent payments, as well as automatic rent increases. And then looking at all of these kind of tied, whether, you know, landlords found them very beneficial or somewhat beneficial, but looking at repair funds, vacancy hold payments, security deposits, and of course, having that housing navigator, that one point of contact. Now, one last chat poll to all of you. So what type of landlord do you think is most willing to overlook screening with a top choice incentive? And go ahead and just answer in the chat who you think, what kind of landlord. A new one I'm seeing. Any other thoughts from folks? Newer landlords, mom and pops, private landlords, ones with smaller properties, mom and pop, things like that. Great. And what we see is that landlords with less than 100 units are most willing to overlook screening criteria. This does not say which screening criteria they will overlook, but they'll overlook some at a whopping 82%. So we do know that incentives can actually help sway the conversation. So looking at landlord engagement post-pandemic, you know, we have a lot of common practices, looking, you know, waiting for clients to start the housing search, you know, giving clients the information, making the charity argument. As we start to see tighter rental markets and things like that, you know, common practices aren't always best practices. So we really want to see people doing a continuous housing search, whether they have a client in the queue or not, looking at a variety of incentives, that communication, being timely with checks, customizing resources for landlords, and really, again, having that housing locator. All of those best practices really need somebody who can be, you know, solely focused on that work in order to make sure that, you know, the landlord is able to follow their business timeline more so than a case management timeline. And so with that, we want to talk about funding, housing location, and landlord incentives. There is a list of potential funding sources, but we do want to hand it over to the folks at DCED so that they can share about the Home Art Program and its the resource for funding housing location activities.
Hey, thanks, Gail. This is Brendan Allman. I am the homeless program manager here at DCED. We implement the state's ESG allocation. We're the collaborative applicant for the Eastern and Western Pennsylvania continuums of care and the HMIS lead agency for those same two continuums of care. And I'm joined by my colleagues, Alyssa Fair and Brandon Durbin, who work on the Home ARP program. Kimberly Palm, the home program manager, I don't believe is on today. She was unable to make it, but we oversee the state's implementation of the Home Investment Partnership Program and the Home ARP program. So we're just going to take a couple minutes today to talk through and provide a high-level overview on our funding that we have available that can support housing locator positions. So starting really quickly with the Emergency Solutions Grant, or ESG. This is an annual allocation that we get from HUD that's been in the ballpark of about $5.7 million. Our eligible applicants are units of local government, so counties, townships, cities, municipalities that are applying on behalf of nonprofits in their communities for a specific need. But we also support nonprofits to apply directly, so long as they're doing or implementing a regional project. And regional project means you are delivering services in more than one county. And the eligible activities under this program are the rapid rehousing, emergency shelter, homelessness prevention, street outreach, homeless management information system support, as well as some admin dollars. Now, I'll just note, while the state does have an allocation of our own emergency shelter or emergency solutions funds, there are also entitlement communities throughout the Commonwealth, such as the city of Lancaster, the city of Harrisburg, city of Philadelphia, that do get their own direct award from HUD for this program, and a couple of the other federal programs as well. So while we encourage you to look at the state allocation, you should also look at your local level to see what funds are available there as well. Next slide, please. So as Gail just mentioned, you know, and I would say in most cases, this may not be true everywhere, but your case managers are doing everything for your clients. You're doing the assessment, the monthly check-ins, or the weekly check-ins, the connection to mainstream resources and housing search on top of that. That's a lot of work for a case manager to do. So ideally, what this can support is the creation of a housing locator position that focuses solely on the housing aspect of a client's project enrollment and how they are engaging with your program, because it's a lot of work to identify housing and get clients housed. So these are some of the eligible activities that you can, or expenses that are eligible under the rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention activities of ESG, and that is doing the assessment of housing barriers and needs and creating a housing action plan to ensure that they're stably housed. You are able to conduct the outreach and negotiation with landlords to bring them into the program and utilize them as a resource. So having that community outreach and landlord engagement as your role as a housing locator, you can assist with submitting rental applications and having that housing counseling to understand the leases. There's the assessment of housing for compliance with ESG requirements for habitability and lead-based paint. Red reasonableness, it's a requirement of the program. The house or the unit needs to be monitored for compliance with habitability inspections. Assistance with obtaining utilities and making moving arrangements, and of course tenant counseling. So these are activities that are eligible under these programs that you can use to start that housing locator position. And of course, I wanted to add there at the bottom that transportation costs are also eligible. to help your clients who may not have transportation get to appointments like signing leases or viewing apartments. You can afford bus passes and transit tickets, mileage for case managers to transport and meet with landlords, purchasing or leasing a vehicle for your staff to make these appointments, as well as taxis and ride shares, but within the context of that's reasonable and appropriate, and there are no other options available in your community. So next slide, Gail. That's just a really quick overview of how Housing Locator fits into the Emergency Solutions Grant Program. And HUD, our federal partners, have come out with a lot of resources over the pandemic, spotlighting on how communities are implementing Housing Locator in their communities, and coming up with some content to really support the creation and continuation of this program. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And with that, I believe I'm turning it over to Brandon as we move to the next slide.
Great. Thank you, Brandon. Hello, everyone. My name is Brandon Durbin. I am one of the grant managers for Home ARP. I'm going to start with some general information about the Home ARP program, since it is a newer program that many of you may be unaware of. Just some quick overview that Home ARP was created through the American Rescue Plan, signed into law March 11th of 2021. HUD originally allocated $73 million to DCED to fund the different eligible activity types to benefit what are called qualified populations. Of the activity options that we had, DCED decided that these 4 activities were the best options for the state of Pennsylvania, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Those are the development of affordable rental housing, supportive services, the acquisition and development of non-congregate shelters, and the rest of the funds are intended for administration and planning. Next slide, please. So the most important factor to keep in mind for Home ARP are its beneficiaries, which are those 4 qualifying populations. Those include homeless, at risk of homelessness, those fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or victims of human trafficking. Lastly, there's this group called all other populations, which are those where people where services or housing is required to prevent homelessness, or alternatively, those at the greatest risk of housing instability. For more specific information on each qualifying population, we'd refer you to the CPD Notice 2110 and regulations that we've cited on this page. There are also sources at the end of the presentation on how to later. So it's like looking for any funds for education, for like say support services or others, that housing location using Home ARP funds, it must benefit these specific qualifications. Next slide, please. Now, DCED is giving preference to applicants to give preference to the homeless and victims of the violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking qualified populations. So when you are looking for opportunities to fund housing location through supportive services, applications that benefit those two, either of those or both of those populations can have advantages over applications or applicants that do not give preference to either of those populations. Next slide. For those who might be interested in expanding rental housing options through Home ARP funds, as there is a major issue or over a lack of rental housing available, DCED is working with PHFA on the development of affordable rental housing. While we are still negotiating the terms, DCED intends to oversee the administration of Home ARP, whereas PHFA will handle applications. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. For those interested in creating those affordable housing or affordable rental housing options, applicants can include nonprofit organizations and private developers. Both of those are eligible to apply for rental funds once those applications will open. I would refer you, of course, to the Home ARP notice for more information on the requirements of Home ARP rental housing. Now I'm going to go ahead and pass this presentation to Alyssa, who's going to describe the supportive services opportunities under Home ARP.
Thank you, Brandon. For supportive services applications with DCED for Home ARP, eligible applicants could include units of local government and nonprofits. Next slide, please. The eligible activities for supportive services that DCED intends to fund are housing search and counseling services, mental health services, transportation, case management, financial assistance costs, and short-term and medium-term financial assistance for rent. Just a note here, landlords may not require tenants to participate in any supportive services as a term in their lease. Next slide, please. Referrals for Home ARP rental projects and supportive services, as well as for the ESG services that Brendan had mentioned, must be accepted from local continuum of care or COC coordinated entry waitlist. Coordinated entry is a process developed by each continuum of care to ensure that all people experiencing a housing crisis have fair and equal access and are quickly identified, assessed for, referred, and connected to housing and assistance based on their strengths and needs. If for some reason it's not feasible to accept referrals from your local COC coordinated entry waitlist, then applicants must justify and describe a different waitlist. And then DCED does have ultimate approval on that alternative waitlist if it will be accepted and approved. Next slide, please. This slide just shows you the different continuums of care in Pennsylvania, and you can look by what county you're located in.
And Alyssa, I'm just going to jump in real quick. I mean, we really encourage all potential applicants, whether that's through ESG or Home ARP, to consult and coordinate with your local continuums of care, since they are directing a lot of the homeless services in your communities. Matching up and aligning your efforts is really imperative. So we highly suggest that coordination. And if you have questions about who your point of contact is for your local continuum of care, you can reach out to me directly or visit HUD's website. They have a list of all the contacts for each continuum of care across the country. So definitely encourage that coordination.
Thank you, Brendan. Next slide, please. These are just some resources if you want to read more about Home ARP. The CPD notice is there, as well as some other links for you. And then the last slide is just our contact list for ESG and the Home ARP program. If you are not already signed up for the CD and H alerts from DCED, please email us. The email address is at the bottom there for general Home ARP inquiries, and we will be happy to add you to that list so that you can stay up to date. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. Thank you so much for that great information. And I think that's a great resource for helping people start to build the infrastructure. So we had wanted to do breakout rooms at the end of our meeting, but of course, due to technical difficulties at the beginning, we're not going to be able to do that. What the Housing Alliance has done is we actually created fact sheets on each of these types of bonuses or financial incentives, and really highlighting a couple of communities across Pennsylvania for some innovative approaches. So, you know, the folks at the Veteran Multi-Service Center have created a barrier removal bonus. It's this very interesting bonus in which, you know, it's really tied to what are the barriers that an individual tenant may have. So, you know, somebody can get up to, you know, I think a full extra rent payment if, you know, they're willing to overlook something as severe as somebody being a sex offender, or if they're only, you know, willing to overlook, you know, maybe a a drug charge or some other minor offense, then it would, only be a percentage of 1 month's rent payment. So it's just very, very interesting, and the first that I've seen like that. So, and then there's also the vacancy payments, particularly what they're doing in Your Way Home, Montgomery County is they offer a hold payment to landlords without a tenant necessarily being lined up. And even before the tenant moves into, or the client moves into the unit, they are paying the vacancy payment up front. So that's something that we've seen, not seen in any other places, that willingness to take the gamble that the landlord is going to truly hold the unit. Recruitment bonuses, the folks at the Bucks Community Opportunity Council, they have a pretty generous sign-on bonus, but they also have a very, very generous referral program. So they are paying landlords to recruit other landlords, which is very cool. What they're doing at the Lehigh Valley RAB is, they are offering repair funds, and it could either be on the front end to help a unit pass inspection, or it can be to help address damages that happen with the client. So that flexibility of, providing money either on the front end or the back end. So we are going to be sending out that information, and I want to thank everybody for being with us. I mean, over 200 of you hung in there all the way to the very, very end. So I really hope that you got value out of today's conversation. And it's a conversation that we plan on continuing. So thank you so much. And we will see you next time.